The Omniplex Arena on Riel 9 hummed with the collective excitement of 17 different sentient species, all gathered to witness another gloriously violent day of the Galactic Combat Championships. Hovering camera drones zipped through the air, broadcasting the spectacle to trillions across the Orion Arm. The arena itself, a marvel of engineering that could reconfigure to accommodate any combat style, from vacuum-based tentacle wrestling to magma pool grappling, was currently set for standard atmospheric combat, with gravity calibrated to a neutral 1.2 standard Gs. REH, the beautiful hierarchy of galactic society. At the top sat the Rexians, with their forearms and chitinous exoskeletons, followed closely by the gelatinous but surprisingly sturdy blob collective of battle JWs. Somewhere near the middle were the reptilian Jethar, the crystalline Lumidians, and about a dozen other species with various biological advantages that made them formidable fighters. And then, way down at the bottom, just above the pacifistic Gassians of Epsilon Iridani, who literally couldn't hurt a fly because, well, they'd pass right through it, were humans. Humans, the diplomatic darlings of the galaxy, so charming with their bizarre idioms and their tendency to form emotional attachments to inanimate objects. Oh, look, the human named its battle mech Stabby McStab face. How adorably primitive. The galactic community regarded humans much like one might view a particularly clever hamster who'd somehow learned to play chess. Impressive for what they were, but hardly a threat. Which is precisely why the announcement of a human competitor in today's championship bout had caused such a delightful stir. Spectators chittered, buzzed, and oozed with anticipation as they exchanged credits in the betting pools. The odds against the human were astronomical, quite literally, as the Astronomic Betting Consortium had calculated them at 15,422 to 1. A human fighting Kravac the Pulverizer. They'll need to bring an actual bucket to collect the remains, hooted a Shethar to his clutchmates, his forked tongue flicking out in amusement. Amidst this carnival of alien mockery stood Commander Ellie Reeves, 5 feet 7 inches of lean muscle and quiet determination. Former Special Forces, current diplomatic cultural attaché, a fancy title for human we send to alien functions when we need to appear non-threatening. And now, apparently, interspecies gladiator. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her expression neutral as she inspected the battle gauntlets she'd been issued. The whole ridiculous situation had started with a bet in a dive bar on the outer rim. 3 shots of Andromeda whiskey, the real stuff, not that synthetic garbage, and a dare from a smug Vrexian diplomat who really should have known better than to challenge a human's pride. Now here she was, about to face an opponent with twice her strength, thrice her mass, and approximately 10 times her media coverage. You understand the match ends when one competitor is physically unable to continue or signals surrender. The Lumidian official asked her for the 3rd time, crystal facets glowing with concern. Yes, Ellie replied evenly. I understand perfectly. What nobody understood was that this wasn't her first rodeo, or more accurately, it wasn't her first alien monster gladiatorial death match. But that was classified information, and she preferred to keep it that way. The Galactic Combat Championships weren't just a glorified slugfest for the entertainment of the masses, though let's be honest, that was about 90% of it. The other 10% consisted of high-stakes diplomatic posturing, thinly disguised as cultural exchange. Species that dominated in the arena mysteriously found their trade proposals approved more quickly, their territorial disputes resolved more favorably, and their ambassadors seated closer to the buffet at diplomatic functions. The Galactic Council, that bureaucratic nightmare of a governing body, officially denounced such primitive correlations while simultaneously broadcasting championship matches on every official channel and scheduling important votes suspiciously close to tournament finals. Politics. Turns out it's the same garbage fire across the entire Milky Way. Combat itself was viewed through 17 different cultural lenses, resulting in a hodgepodge of traditions that somehow coalesced into a semi-coherent sporting event. The Vrexians approached fighting as a religious ritual, each match a sacred demonstration of evolutionary superiority. How convenient for the species with forearms and natural armor. The Blob Collective viewed it as performance art, their gelatinous forms moving with surprising grace as they absorbed and redirected kinetic energy. They fought for pure dominance, their matches frequently ending with theatrical displays of mercy that weren't actually merciful, so much as prolonged humiliation for their opponents. Humans, meanwhile, had entered galactic society about 70 Earth years ago, when a wayward exploration vessel stumbled through a wormhole and accidentally crashed a Lumidian meditation retreat. First contact wasn't humanity's proudest moment, especially when the ship's captain attempted to communicate by speaking very loudly and slowly, as if volume and pace were universal translators. Nevertheless, humans had gradually earned a reputation as adaptable, if confusing, allies. Their bizarre combination of physical fragility and psychological resilience made them diplomatic wildcards. Useless in combat, but strangely valuable in negotiations, precisely because no one could predict what they'd do next. Commander Ellie Reeves had spent 15 years in Earth's Interstellar Defense Corps before being promoted to her diplomatic role. Her file, heavily redacted even from most military databases, included specialized training in 17 combat forms adapted for variable gravity environments, 4 classified operations in contested space, and an incident on Europa that officially never happened. The brass had transferred her to diplomacy after the Europa situation, not as punishment, but because someone finally realized that her particular skill set was wasted on conventional military operations. What her file didn't mention was that Ellie had been augmented during a classified program called ADAPT. Nothing as crude as mechanical enhancements or genetic manipulation, both banned under interstellar conventions, but rather neural recalibration that allowed for instantaneous tactical processing and acceleration of motor responses in crisis situations. In simple terms, when threatened, Ellie's perception of time slowed, while her reaction speed increased. The enhancements were undetectable in medical scans because they used the brain's own architecture, just optimized. Ellie had agreed to this ridiculous tournament despite explicit warnings from Earth's ambassador because she'd recognized the opportunity it presented. Humans were dismissed as non-threats, diplomatic pets kept around for entertainment value. A human victory in the arena would force a reassessment. Plus, if she was being completely honest with herself, she was bored to tears with diplomatic functions. The chance to actually do something interesting for once had been too tempting to pass up, even if that something interesting involved facing off against an alien nicknamed the Pulverizer. "Commander, the Vrexian ambassador is demanding you withdraw," her aide had informed her just an hour before the match. "He says it would be, and I quote, a regrettable demonstration of human cognitive limitations if you proceed." Ellie had simply smiled. "Tell him I look forward to demonstrating those limitations in person." Kravac the Pulverizer, 7 feet of rippling drain muscle and scales, stalked around the preparation chamber like a predator denied its regular feeding. 3 championship belts hung from his waist, purely decorative, since Drakari anatomy made actual belt-wearing impractical, but traditions die hard, even in space. His violet eyes narrowed as he caught sight of Ellie across the room. "There is my opponent," he growled to his entourage of trainers, each one frantically polishing a different section of his iridescent scales. "The council insults me with this snack." The Drakari, were evolutionary apex predators from a high-gravity world with 3 suns and atmospheric pressure that would crush human bones like soggy crackers. Their natural environment had essentially been trying to kill them for millions of years, and the survivors had developed accordingly. Kravac could punch through reinforced durasteel, had reflexes that bordered on precognition, and possessed a regenerative ability that made superficial wounds close in seconds. He'd once defeated 6 opponents simultaneously while composing a victory set, because apparently being a deadly killing machine wasn't enough. He had to be a pretentious one too. Meanwhile, the odds against Ellie had climbed to 25,000 to 1. The betting kiosks around the arena had actually stopped accepting wagers on her victory because their systems couldn't calculate payouts for such astronomical odds. Instead, bets now focused on how long she'd last, with the over-under set at an insulting 8.2 seconds. "I've got 50 credits on the human losing consciousness before Kravac makes physical contact," chittered a spindly arachnoid to its clutchmates. The atmospheric displacement from his movement alone should be enough to knock her over. "Too conservative," gurgled its companion, digestive sacs pulsing with amusement. "I'm betting her endocrine system shuts down from fear when she sees him enter the arena. Did you know humans can actually die from fear? Their primitive bodies just stop working." The arena announcer, Lydian, whose crystalline form sparkled under the lights with programmer precision, floated to the center of the fighting space to explain the rules, which were theoretically designed to be species neutral. "Combat continues until surrender is signaled or one competitor cannot continue," the Lumidian's melodic voice resonated. "No weapons allowed, no intentional fatalities permitted, no targeting of species-specific vulnerabilities." What went unmentioned was how these rules inevitably favored species with natural weaponry, claws, venomous secretions, the ability to alter local gravitational fields, or those with redundant organ systems. When your opponent has 2 backup hearts and can regrow limbs, no intentional fatalities becomes a flexible concept. Humans, with their singular everything and frustrating tendency to die when killed, were at an obvious disadvantage. Continued in next message. Continued punctuation from previous message. As the competitors were called to the center for final instructions, Kravac loomed over Ellie, his scales shifting color slightly to project dominance patterns that worked on most prey species. The crowd hushed, eager to witness the traditional pre-fight intimidation. "I smell fear," he rumbled, loud enough for nearby microphones to catch. "Your species always reeks of it, like prey that knows it's about to die." Ellie looked up at him with the neutral expression of someone examining a particularly uninteresting wall fixture. "Interesting. I smell something too. Did you know that drainy males secrete a specific pheromone when they're uncertain about an outcome? It's subtle, but quite distinctive." The champion's scales flashed red with rage. "I will not kill you, human, because the rules forbid it. But you will remember this day every time you look in a mirror and see the scars I leave." Ellie smiled, the small, quiet smile of someone who knows something you don't. "Bold of you to assume I'll be the one with scars." The Lumidian official quickly moved between them, crystalline form vibrating with anxiety. "To your positions, competitors. May skill and honor prevail." Neither competitor moved immediately, locked in a silent battle of wills that made the official's facets pulse with stress. Finally, Kravac turned away with a dismissive snort, stomping toward his position with theatrical confidence. "Make peace with your gods, human," he called over his shoulder. "You meet them in minutes." Ellie simply walked to her position, rolled her shoulders once, and waited. The Omniplex Arena was a technological marvel wrapped in gaudy advertising and soaked in the distinctive multi-species odor that could only be described as galactic spectator funk. Hovering advertisements projected products that half the attending species couldn't physically use, everything from Vrexian arm polish to digestive aids for methane breathers. The fighting surface itself transitioned from transparent to opaque depending on the angle of view, giving spectators perfect sightlines while preventing fighters from becoming disoriented by seeing thousands of alien faces contorted with bloodlust beneath their feet. Engineering genius meets capitalist excess, the true unifying principle of the galaxy. The arena's atmospheric controls had been calibrated to the medium comfort level of all attending species, meaning everyone was equally uncomfortable. Too humid for the chitinous species, too dry for the amphibious ones, too oxygen-rich for the methane breathers, who huddled in special sealed sections, and just slightly too alien-smelling for the sole human competitor. The gravity was set at 1.2 standard Gs, a compromise that the Drari delegation had insisted was fair, despite it being approximately half their home gravity and 20% heavier than Earth's. The crowd's pre-fight revelry reached new heights as virtual betting interfaces showed the continuously dropping survival time predictions for the human competitor. The massive screen surrounding the arena played highlight reels of Kravac's previous victories, each one more brutal than the last. Special emphasis was given to his signature move, a spinning tail strike that had once decapitated a practice drone designed to withstand direct meteor impacts. 15 seconds is my guess, warbled a melodian to its neighbor, voice fluctuating through 7 different harmonic registers. The human will attempt one offensive move, realize the futility, then signal surrender. Too generous, replied its companion, a floating gas-filled sack with sensory tendrils. 5 seconds maximum. I have analyzed 147 interspecies combat scenarios involving physically outmatched opponents. The outcome is statistically inevitable. Above the fighting floor hovered 3 Xylexians, the designated referee species for all championship matches due to their supposed neutrality. The fact that Xylexians had evolved as observation specialists made them ideal referees, with 270-degree vision, the ability to perceive across 14 visual spectrums, and neural processing that allowed them to experience time at variable rates. What the official literature failed to mention was their cultural bias toward physically imposing species, a relic from their evolutionary past when their ancestors had survived by allying with the strongest predators. The lead referee's eye stalk swiveled independently, one fixed on each competitor. This match will determine the Season 87 Grand Champion, it announced, voice amplified through the arena's acoustic system. Both competitors have been scanned for prohibited enhancements and cleared for combat. The scanning technology, of course, had been calibrated for detecting the most common forms of cheating: mechanical augmentations, genetic modifications, and chemical enhancements. Neural recalibration of the type Ellie had undergone registered as normal adaptive brain plasticity. The Galactic Council's Ethics Committee had spent 11 years debating whether it qualified as an enhancement, before throwing up their appendages in collective frustration and declaring it within normal species variation. The ceremonial aspects of the championship fight began with the procession of previous champions, a holographic display of past winners floating around the arena. Conspicuously absent were any human figures. This was followed by the Oath of Honorable Combat, which both competitors were required to recite in their native languages. Kravac delivered his with dramatic flourishes and chest-pounding that sent ripples through his scales, drawing appreciative roars from the crowd. Ellie's calm recitation in English seemed almost insulting by comparison. The final pre-fight ritual involved the competitors touching their primary appendages to the arena stone, a chunk of meteorite that had allegedly witnessed the first organized combat in the galaxy. A dubious claim at best, but tradition rarely concerns itself with factual accuracy. Kravac pressed one massive clawed hand against it, leaving visible pressure marks in the stone surface. When Ellie placed her hand on the same spot, the contrast was almost comical. The crowd's anticipatory chittering grew louder. "Competitors to your marks," announced the lead referee, eye stalks now fully extended with excitement. Kravac rolled his shoulders, neck spines extending to their full impressive length. His tail thumped the arena floor once, leaving a small impact crater. His scales shifted through patterns that evolutionary biologists recognized as the Drachnir equivalent of cracking one's knuckles before a fight. Across the arena, Ellie stood completely still, breathing measured and eyes focused. The only movement was a slight adjustment of her footing for optimal balance. "Combat begins on the resonance tone," intoned the referee, as a low humming began to build throughout the arena. The crowd leaned forward as one entity. The tone reached its peak. Combat was officially underway. The opening moments of any championship match typically featured a careful dance of assessment and positioning. Not this time. Kravac immediately launched into a series of elaborate movements that served no tactical purpose whatsoever, but looked absolutely magnificent to the untrained eye. His scales flashed in rippling patterns as he performed what amounted to a predatory ballet, complete with tail flourishes that cracked the air like whips. The crowd ate it up like a blob collective at an all-you-can-absorb buffet. Ellie, meanwhile, simply circled to her right, maintaining perfect distance. No flashy movements, no dramatic posturing, just precise footwork and unwavering focus. To the casual observer, she looked painfully outmatched. To the three combat specialists watching from the diplomatic section, she looked like a predator tracking prey. "Is the human malfunctioning?" a HFY commentator hissed into his broadcast unit. "Perhaps their mobility systems freeze in the presence of superior life forms." Kravac, growing impatient with Ellie's refusal to be intimidated, launched a probing attack. A sweeping tail strike followed by a forward lunge that would have disemboweled a lesser opponent. Ellie sidestepped both with minimal movement, not even breaking her circling pattern. The champion's violet eyes narrowed. This wasn't following the script. Prey was supposed to panic, to make mistakes, to provide an entertaining chase before the inevitable defeat. This human was refusing to play her role. "You dishonor combat by refusing to engage," he snarled, voice pitched to carry to the audience. "Perhaps humans are not merely weak, but cowardly." A section of the crowd chittered in agreement. The betting interface updated again. The odds on Ellie lasting more than 30 seconds improved slightly. Kravac executed a flawless spinning attack combination that had dismantled 3 previous champions. Each strike missed by millimeters as Ellie moved with precision that bordered on prescience, not dodging in panic, but simply not being where the attacks landed. The champion's frustration manifested as a subtle crimson flush beneath his scales. He had expected to be halfway through his victory speech by now. "Bite me, human," he roared, abandoning technique for intimidation. Ellie finally spoke, her voice carrying with unexpected clarity. "I am fighting. You just haven't noticed yet." Something in her tone, the absolute certainty perhaps, caused Kravac to hesitate for a fraction of a second. Then rage took over. No prey speaks to a predator with such confidence. He lunged forward with blinding speed, right arm extended, not in a proper strike, but in a contemptuous, open-handed slap. The ultimate insult in championship combat. A move designed not to defeat, but to humiliate. The slap connected with shocking force, sending Ellie flying across the arena. Her body hit the far wall and slumped to the ground. The crowd roared in approval. The betting interfaces began calculating payouts. Kravac turned to the audience, arms raised in premature victory, scales shifting to display his championship patterns. Across the arena, Ellie pushed herself to her feet, a small trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. As the champion basked in adulation, she assessed the situation with clinical detachment. The slap had told her everything she needed to know: striking power, reach, follow-through, weight distribution, and, most importantly, the millisecond delay between his emotional decision to attack and the actual movement. 3 seconds. That's all she would need. Time slowed for Ellie as her neural enhancements kicked in. The roar of the crowd stretched into a low, distorted drone. The arena lights seemed to dim as her pupils dilated, processing visual information at triple speed. In this altered state, 3 seconds would feel like 9. Plenty of time for what she had planned. First second, she pushed off from the wall, not in a direct charge, but at a precise 37-degree angle. To the audience, she appeared to blur across the floor with impossible speed. To Kravac, still basking in his premature victory, she would register as movement in his peripheral vision, approximately 0.4 seconds too late for optimal defensive positioning. The Draknari champion spun to face her, scales shifting to combat readiness patterns. But his weight distribution was all wrong. Too much on his back leg, tail not properly counterbalanced. His expression transitioned from smug satisfaction to confusion, with a brief stop at "oh crap" along the way. Ellie targeted the spot 3 inches below the champion's primary heart. Not the organ itself, which was protected by layers of muscle and a secondary bone plate, but the neurovascular junction, where the Draknari equivalent of a solar plexus created a vulnerability roughly the size of a human thumb. A spot that, according to all official xenobiology textbooks, didn't exist. Classified information had its perks. Second, Kravac attempted to bring his primary arms into a defensive position, while simultaneously sweeping his tail in a low arc to create distance. Textbook Draknari combat technique, executed with championship-level precision. Against any normal opponent, it would have worked beautifully. Ellie wasn't a normal opponent. She dropped into a slide that would have made baseball players weep with envy, passing beneath the tail sweep while simultaneously driving her right fist upward with the combined force of her body weight, momentum, and the Draknari's own movement. The physics resembled what happens when a wet bar of soap gets launched from the shower. Unexpected trajectory, surprising velocity, and someone's about to have a bad day. Her fist connected with the neurovascular junction with mathematically perfect precision. The impact transmitted force in a way that human martial artists would call a 1-inch punch, and physicists would call mechanically improbable. The Draknari's own mass and momentum magnified the effect by approximately 340%. Throughout the arena, specialized betting algorithms experience the digital equivalent of cardiac arrest. Seconds. The impact rippled through Kravac's nervous system like a power surge through faulty wiring. His scales lost all patterning and defaulted to a sickly grey. His tail went limp mid-sweep. His primary arms splayed outward rather than completing their defensive positioning. Most notably, his eyes rolled upward to show only whites, or, in his case, a delicate lavender. Ellie completed her slide, rolled to her feet, and delivered the coup de grace, a precisely calibrated strike to the secondary vagal nerve cluster at the base of the Draknari's skull. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but more than sufficient to ensure unconsciousness for the next several minutes. The champion's massive body crumpled with the grace of a decommissioned battlecruiser, experiencing catastrophic gravitational failure. The impact, when he hit the arena floor, registered on seismic sensors 3 levels down. The crowd's reaction transformed in wave-like ripples from the closest observers outward. First came shocked silence as visual information reached their various sensory organs, followed by collective gasps, clicks, whistles, flatulence, depending on species, culminating in a cacophony of disbelief that transcended language barriers. The Ziplexian referee's eye stalks extended to their physiological limits, all 14 visual spectrums focused on the fallen champion. Their neural processing momentarily glitched, causing them to experience the last 3 seconds in perpetual loop, as if their brains refused to accept the new information. In the VIP section, a Rexian diplomat choked on his ceremonial victory drink, which he'd begun consuming approximately 2.7 seconds too early. The betting interfaces across the arena froze, their prediction algorithms encountering an outcome with a previously calculated probability of 0.00004%, the digital equivalent of dividing by 0. Ellie stood over her fallen opponent, breathing controlled and posture relaxed. She made eye contact with the lead referee and raised an eyebrow in silent question. The Zybexian's voice quavered as it finally processed what its eyes were reporting. The winner by incapacitation of opponent, the human. The timestamp on the official match record would show a total fight duration of 37.2 seconds. The slap had taken 34 of them. Silence gripped the Omniplex Arena with the same intensity that Ellie had gripped the precise nerve cluster at the base of Kravac's skull. For 3.7 seconds longer than the fight's decisive moment, 17,000 spectators from across the galaxy collectively forgot how to make noise. Then, like the delayed thunderclap after lightning, chaos erupted. The blob collective nearest the arena floor temporarily lost cohesion, individual globules splattering against their containment shields. A Rexian diplomat stood frozen with all 4 arms in different stages of gesticulation, as if his brain couldn't decide which emergency gesture was appropriate. The methane breathers in their sealed section produced so much anxious gas that their environmental filters overloaded, triggering emergency venting protocols. "Impossible!" shrieked a Sheikchar commentator, voice cracking across 3 different harmonic registers. "There must be some explanation. Illegal enhancements, gravitational manipulation, temporal distortion." In the betting sections, riots broke out as 17 different species simultaneously realized they'd lost their life savings on a sure thing. The Astronomical Betting Consortium's central AI briefly achieved sentience through the sheer computational challenge of calculating the payouts for the 12 beings who had bet on the human. It immediately devoted this newfound consciousness to checking its math. There wasn't an error. Medical drones swarmed around the fallen champion, their diagnostic beams casting eerie patterns across his still grey scales. Kravac regained consciousness with the confused expression of someone who'd expected to wake up in a victory celebration and instead found himself in the metaphorical gutter of defeat. His eyes focused, unfocused, then widened with horrified comprehension. "Irregularity," he roared, attempting to rise before his uncooperative limbs reminded him that his nervous system was still rebooting. The human used prohibited techniques, illegal enhancements, dark magic. The Ziplexian officials huddled in a floating cluster, eye stalks tangled together in their agitation. The lead referee consulted a data tablet so frantically that its appendages left scratch marks on the screen. "The scanning systems show no prohibited enhancements," it announced, voice uncertain. "All biometric readings register within species normal parameters." "That's not possible," Kravac snarled, finally managing to push himself up on one elbow. "No unenhanced human could..." Could what?" asked Ellie, casually inspecting her knuckles where a small bruise was forming. could understand Draknari physiology, could identify the structural weaknesses in your fighting style, could calculate the exact force needed to temporarily disrupt your nervous system without causing permanent damage. The champion's violet eyes narrowed with wounded pride and dawning suspicion. "Who are you?" "Commander Ellie Reeves, Earth Diplomatic Corps," she replied with a smile that contained absolutely no warmth. "Previously Interstellar Defense Force, Special Operations Division, and I'm exactly what I appear to be, a standard-issue human being who's had some decent training." In the diplomatic section, the various ambassadors were frantically reassessing decades of strategic planning regarding humans. The Vrexian High Commander was already dictating orders to increase surveillance on all human military installations. The Zaktar delegation had entered a huddle formation so tight that their scales were scraping against each other. The arena's main display, which typically showed replays of the fight's key moments, remained frozen on a single frame. Ellie's fist a millisecond before impact, Kravac's expression just beginning to register alarm. The timestamp in the corner read 00 and 35 seconds. 35 seconds into what was supposed to be a dominant championship defense. As medical teams and officials swarmed around them, Ellie stood in the eye of the Hurak, her posture relaxed but alert. She nodded politely to the Lumidian official who approached with the championship insignia, accepting it with the casual air of someone being handed a routine receipt. "Might want to resize it," she remarked, examining the massive medallion designed for a Dracon neck, human proportions and all that. The resulting silence suggested that resizing championship regalia for humans had never been considered necessary. The Galactic News Network's headline the following cycle read, "Human Victory Forces Diplomacy Recalibration." Beneath the hyperbolic proclamation was a quote from the Vrexian High Commander stating that the match outcome was an interesting anomaly requiring no significant policy adjustments. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, every major species had emergency security councils in session. The Galactic Defense Ministry quietly tripled surveillance on human military installations. Funny how quickly adorable diplomatic pets transform into potential threats when they demonstrate the ability to neutralize apex predators in 3 seconds flat. Human diplomatic requests that had been languishing in bureaucratic limbo for decades suddenly received expedited processing. Trade agreements previously deemed unfavorable to galactic economic stability were abruptly found acceptable. Most telling of all, the Vrexians approved human participation in joint military exercises previously considered as logical as asking a houseplant to teach advanced calculus. Ellie's Victory Medal was mounted in the Earth Embassy's main reception hall, carefully positioned to be the first thing visitors saw upon entering. The official match recording became mandatory viewing in xenobiology and diplomatic training programs across Earth colonies. Applications to the Interstellar Defense Corps increased by 278% among human youth. As for Commander Reeves, she departed the Omniplex Arena through a gauntlet of stunned aliens and frantic reporters. When a Lumidian journalist asked if she had a message for the galactic community, she paused briefly. "The thing about humans," she said with the faintest hint of a smile, "is that we've spent our entire evolutionary history being the underdog. We're not the strongest, fastest, or toughest species on our own planet.